And hello again. Next, we're going to, in our series of nature textures for our class, we are going to tackle bark. And this is going to be done, it's going to start out in a very similar way. It's going to be done in a very similar way um, to the gravel video tutorial lecture. So if you haven't watched the gravel video, go ahead and watch that first. And this will make a lot more sense. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about, as I mentioned in the gravel lecture, um, if you're going for a CGI look that's not photo real, but it's kind of, it kind of real, it looks like maybe it was painted or something like that. Um, then if that's the style that your game design document calls for, and that should be noted in your game design document. Your artistic style has got to be a huge part of your game design document. Um, if you care about how it looks at all, I can't stress that enough. But anywho, um, if you want that CGI look, the almost real but not quite real, you've got two choices. You either hire a digital or traditional painter to paint it for you, either in Photoshop or with oil paints on a canvas and easel, um, depending on your budget and your resources. Um, if you're a painter yourself, um, then you can certainly do that. You can actually hire yourself out to video game designers to do that because you will always be in demand if you're an actual fine art painter, um, like Thomas Kincaid or whatever. As a matter of fact, speaking of Thomas Kincaid, well, first of all, he got his. If you're familiar with Thomas Kincaid's artwork, and it wouldn't hurt for you to be, he actually got his before he became one of America's most beloved painters of rural rustic scenes. And my parents actually have two of his prints in their house. I don't know if I should admit that or not. The Before that, he was actually back in the '80s a special effects painter. Little known secret about one of America's most traditional and beloved fine art painters was he started out doing backgrounds for special effects things like Star Wars and whatnot. Anyhow, so if you don't have access to someone like Thomas Kincaid, though, this is what you do have access to. What you do have access to is textures.com, formerly cgtextures.com, and this website is pretty much the Walmart of textures for any kind of project. It's especially good for texture mapping. Several times I have been in a game studio and seen one of their texture artists with this website up on their screen. This is where a good many textures come from. So get an account here, and at some point you're probably gonna have to spend some money for it, but you got to spend money to make money, and enjoy this site because chances are, whatever I assign you, you can find it here, and you might even find it for free. I give you a 50-50 chance. They've got some of their low-res images that are absolutely free. So that's it for textures.com. I still call it CG Textures because for like a decade it was known as CG Textures. Um, so if you hear me say CG Textures, that's just because I'm old and I'm stuck in my ways. Okay, so enough of CG Textures or textures.com, whatever you want to call it. Moving on now to Photoshop. If I can find it. From cgtextures.com. From textures.com, I got this delicious picture of tree bark. And we're going to make that painterly. We're going to use some of the same techniques that we used for the gravel lecture. So again, if you haven't watched that, please do. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to present another problem and use this texture as a way to solve that problem. A lot of times you will have something like a tree trunk, a relatively large object, and you have only a small image to work with. So how do you make that image apply to that entire object when you're UV mapping? Well, There are two different ways, and one of which we've already discussed. You can take that image, put it onto that object, and then repeat it around that object in the process that, as you know now, is called tiling. Same way with an image in a web page's background. It just repeats over and over and over again until it fills the entire surface. That's one way to do it. The problem with that is there's two possible problems. First, there is the problem of seams, and we've already discussed how to get rid of seams. The second problem that we've already also mentioned is patterns. The human eye is drawn to patterns. It's a psychologically proven constant. If you have patterns, it takes a player out of the game and makes them think about the technical side of what they're playing. Instead of seeing a nicely painted tree in the background, all of a sudden they realize, oh, look, see, that's where that tile is, or that's where that pattern is. That's how they made this game, and they're thinking about the game's technical production now instead of playing the game, and that's just a total. It just at least for a brief second there, it kind of kills the fun, except for people like me that just really get fascinated by things like that. All right, so what we're going to do though is we are going to take this image and we are going to basically, that'll be good enough right there. We're going to use this as a basis for creating a larger image. Well, not a larger image, but an image that has more content to it. So here's my first layer. All I did was shrink it down. I'm going to hit Control J, and I'm going to dupe it and move it up. And I totally didn't plan for this to happen, but it works out rather well. That actually lines up. But then again, it's tree bark. It's not really a surprise. But what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to hit Free Transform, and I'm going to turn it 180 degrees. And this should be actually easier than I thought. Then I'm going to dupe that layer and bring that down. Now there's a little bit of a seam right there. And we're going to get rid of the seams in just a little bit. So, but now I've got, a good portion of it, 1/3 of it is now filled with data. So I'm going to collapse those three. And I'm just going to use my rubber stamp tool. And I'm going to start filling in. Now, the last thing I want to do is to fill in close to what my, start painting close to my source. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Option on the Mac or whatever it is on a PC. And let's see, I think that is Alt on a PC. I've got a PC sitting next to me. Click right there, but then I'm going to go down here and start painting. And I'm just going to start randomly doing this. Randomization is the key, and Photoshop can't make it as random as you can. So spend the extra time just painting stuff in. And then from what you've painted, go over here as well. But just never paint close to where you sampled, or that will cause a pattern to emerge. So the further away you can do it, the less likely you are to accidentally get a pattern to form. But if you keep sampling from the same place, like I was doing there for a brief second, then you might cause another pattern to form. So you just kind of got to practice with it, get a feel for it there. But again, just randomly Start painting things. And don't paint a lot either. That's the third thing I meant. Tip I meant to mention to you. Just a quick swoof. Don't sit there and do this, la 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 la, because you're just repeating what's over here in mass quantities. You want to just use tiny, tiny little bits and pieces over and over again from different sources, cloned or rubber stamped into different areas. All right. Then start looking for patterns. Now, right through here where the original image was, it's a lot more crisper. I don't know if that's an actual word or not. So I am going to paint that right through here and then mix and match. And that's a function that's more specific to a bark texture that has kind of stripes built into it than anything else. But I am already starting to see patterns form, so I kind of want to just lay off of this. All right. I don't know if it's an actual term or not, but I call it banding when I start seeing bands of certain areas forming patterns. I see a seam down here too, by the way. Not cool. All right. Yeah, I said I was going to fix those seams, and then I forgot to go back and do it. Okay, so there's that. Again, we can apply our filters. We can go to our filter gallery, and cutout's not going to be our friend just yet. We'll do maybe a watercolor here. Yeah, let's do a watercolor, but by the way, that's a great way to get some digital camouflage if you're interested. Really no way to get that done, so that's just cool. I wanted to show you that there. But texturizer, none of this is really going to work. Actually, we want to come back to stylize in just a second for something else. Actually, now I'm just messing around, kind of showing you stuff. Really, what we need to do is come back to watercolor. Actually, before we do that, we need to duplicate a layer, and we're going to apply the artistic filter to that, not the original. That would have not been smart. I'm going to do that and then multiply. So now it looks like a painted tree trunk. Imagine that wrapped around the cylinder that is the tree trunk. Go back and make another duplicate of the original. And this time, back to filter gallery. Now do the cutout. Bring our levels way up though. Simplicity down and fidelity up. And we're going to multiply this as well. Might try even overlay on this one. Yeah, let me try that. Okay, so actually I like this better than the multiply. So I'm just going to hide multiply for just a second. I like this. I think this gives us a more painterly approach with better details than that, obviously, actually. But it's not quite painterly enough. It still looks like a photograph. So I'm going to just duplicate this layer right there. Repeat that overlay effect, basically in effect double it. And that looks like it was painted. If we really wanted to, we could go something like well, that's not what I wanted to do. I forgot to make a duplicate layer. Well, you know what? That's good enough right there. That looks like a painted tree texture, and no one ever needs to know, and no one will ever be able to figure out that it came from this. So we basically just get these two. We merge. Actually, no, we don't. We merge. Let's try that one more time. Merge that, and there you go. Sorry, I thought I saw something going on there. So yeah, there it is. Now that would be used to wrap around the entire tree without tiling. Um, just try that just a little bit right by itself as well. No, see that I can't really tell what that is. That doesn't look like tree bark. That, however, looks like tree bark. If anything, it looks a little bit too much like tree bark. Um, so I'm going to do this one more time, except this time I'm going to do. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to start with the original layer again. Bring that up. This will be the watercolor and set that to multiply. And the opacity to 50%. Yeah, that gives it more of a painted look. Because if everything else looks like it was obviously painted by either hand with oil and canvas or digitally, and then you get this one thing like a tree trunk that looks like it was completely just a photograph. That tree trunk is going to stand out and draw attention to itself in a bad way, which again takes them out of the game experience. So let's see here. Yeah, well, I thought I had a couple of extra filters on this computer that I don't. But anywho, so there is your painted tree bark texture. Uh, oh, I know what else we wanted to do. Just for grins and giggles, I'm going to duplicate this again. I'm going to take all my saturation out of it. And I'm going to go to Filter, Stylize, Emboss. Bring the height way up. Sorry, down. Actually, I'll just leave it the way it was. This is what I wanted to bring up. Bring that up, and that gives it a really, really rich texture as well. That was the part I was forgetting that kind of brings it all together. All right, so there is your painterly tree bark texture.